thank you everyone for joining us here today. Excited to be kicking off a new webinar series here at AbeTech, where today we're going to be focused on RFID and looking at the trends, the technology, and really how our end users are utilizing this technology to solve some pretty complex business problems and gain some really exciting operational efficiency within the industry. So thank you for our partner Xemelgo, who's going to be joining us here today, some guest speakers. And the goal is to have an interactive conversation here as we look through the different trends, the technology. So there is the Q&A portion. As you guys have questions, if you hear anything that's of interest during the conversation, please feel free to post those questions in that Q&A section. And we'll do a little live Q&A here at the end. And if we don't get to all the questions, we'll be sure to follow up with anyone after the conversation here today. So again, thank you all for joining. A quick introduction for our speakers here today. So I'm Ryan Burgett. I'm with AbeTech. I am the Director of Product and Solutions here. And joining me from an AbeTech side, I have Adam Hendrickson. And Adam, if you wouldn't mind, you want to give a quick introduction, a little history on AbeTech and your role here.
Sure, yeah. AbeTech, we're a premier solutions integrator for data capture solutions. Today we'll be focusing on RFID. Been in business for over 32 years. I've been with the company for 13 years, focused on RFID, starting off with boots on the ground installation and now leading our RFID practice. So my primary role is working with our account executives and the clients to understand the client goals, design a solution that'll work for them, and then bring in partners like Xemelgo to implement the solution.
Perfect. Excellent, Adam. And yeah, from a Xemelgo perspective, we have Ruben Press and Akila Tadanada. So Ruben, if you wouldn't mind, little intro on yourself and the team and a little history on Xemelgo for those who maybe aren't familiar.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, great to be here and talk to everyone. So Xemelgo is we're a SaaS provider. We're software up in the cloud. And we deliver solutions leveraging technology. So today we're really focused on RFID and what we're doing with RFID and how we're leveraging that technology solution. And with our software, we have the ability to intake that data and present it in a way that's easily absorbed by businesses to impact operations, to allow for more informed business decisions. And we're a modular solution. So what that means is we allow you to only have to deploy what you need, not to pull a full stack of solutions that you're only using 10% of it. So in this case, we have modules like inventory management for tracking your min-max levels of certain products, asset tracking for trying to understand where your assets are at any given time, and understanding last known locations and triggering alerts if things need to be in compliance or service or end of life. Work in process tracking from work cell in a manufacturing environment to make sure product is flowing smoothly throughout the operations. And also, shipment and receiving verification. That's a big use case we're seeing out there today is, companies verifying what's being shipped, when it's being shipped or received against what the order is expecting. So these are just some examples of the modules that we have to offer. Also, we're an embrace and extend solution. So, we're not about replacing existing systems. We're about, adding the ability to grab information on the front lines of operations and bring it into our system, and then feed that data seamlessly into back-end systems. So what you're seeing on the screen here is showing sensor-based technologies on the left, and predominantly what we're seeing today is passive RFID is being used the most. I would say probably 90 to 95% of our deployments have been passive RFID, which is pretty incredible from where we were just a few years ago. We're intaking that data, we're presenting it through dashboards and reporting, and then we're able to feed that information into back-end systems seamlessly so that we can act as a middleware, or we can actually act as a all-in-one encompassing solution if you don't want to integrate with the back-end system initially. So Akil, anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I think Ruben gave a pretty good overview. I would say our goal at Xemelgo really has been to make RFID easy. A lot of people have tried this for a lot of different years, and it's always been a super cumbersome sort of deployment, trying to figure out how to pull all of these pieces together. And I think with AbeTech, we've really made it Apple-like easy, where they are experts in hardware. We have turnkey software, and we can get customers up and running in almost a day or two. And that's really, I feel like, what's been missing in this industry is a lot of people are interested, but they're not able to make the most of it just because it's been so complicated in the past. But going forward, our goal is to make it Apple easy.
Yeah. Absolutely, kid. And funny you mentioned that, right? So, we've always heard RFID, this is the year of RFID. And I kind of like, and I hate the cliche, I shiver every time I hear it, where, is this a jinx? Is something going to happen where we don't see the adoption? And it seems to be holding true, right? Over the past few years, as you mentioned, right? Making this easy, right? Getting access to the equipment, to the data, and really streamlining the process, right? That we can stand up these solutions. So, one of my first questions, and I'll pose it to you, Rowan, for, do you think we've reached that tipping point where RFID adoption across the industry is finally here to stay? And where do you see that heading in the future?
That's a great question. And, I've been in auto ID and data collection solutions for the last 30 years, and RFID I've been playing with for the last 20 years. And it's incredible where we are today, the maturity of the technology. And that's really what it's taken, is the maturity, because, the cost of tags were too expensive. The technology can only read, 5 feet, 10 feet, whatever, depending on the type of material you're trying to read. So we're in a situation now where I think some of the key factors kind of include overall increased awareness of the solution and really how it can impact business, the cost reduction of the labels and the hardware, for that matter. It's a standards-based technology, so that, if you buy a tag from one company, can another reader from another company read it? And yes, it can. So I think all these components kind of come together and put us in a position that things really work, and the impact we're having on businesses today is real. And we've seen just a tremendous amount of activity around RFID deployments because it really works. And in the past, maybe it was active technology. People were thinking they needed to do and manage those batteries to try to get the the readability. But with passive RFID and where the technology has matured to, we're in a really good spot, and we're seeing great results with our clients today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Adam, from your standpoint, right? Talking about the key shifts in the technology, you might expand a little bit on what you're seeing from the adoption of passive RFID and really how that technology has kind of emerged to make this a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, I think Ruben touched on a couple of key factors, right? The cost of the hardware has come down. The cost of the tags has really come down. Performance and reliability has really increased, even on stuff that 3, 4, 5 years ago, like tagging metal, tagging liquid, was unheard of, and now there's standard tags off the shelf that work well in those environments. So those are two key things. I think also the ability to integrate with the hardware has really streamlined and been easier now. It's a lot more straightforward across hardware manufacturers. They make it easier to integrate with the hardware, as well as platforms like Xemelgo making it easier to take the data from the hardware and push it into clients' ERP systems. Before, it used to be quite a process to try to figure out how are we going to take the RFID data from the equipment and get it into an ERP or a warehouse management system. Xemelgo has really made that easy to do with their platform. And then some other things I think kind of lend towards the easier adoption or the more adoption in the industry is some of the mandates, right? Some of these larger clients have seen, Walmart tried it 20 years ago. Because the technology wasn't ready, the tag prices were high, it fell flat. But now that some of that stuff's come down, they're pushing that back out again. Companies like Walmart, Dillard's, Dick's, a lot of clothing retailers are pushing and demands onto their suppliers to tag all their stuff because they see the added benefit, and the cost has gotten to that point where it can make sense. It makes sense to implement those solutions to cut down the amount of labor required for inventory tracking and supply chain management. And then other things like the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA 204. Well, that's not an RFID mandate particularly, right? It's food supply chain traceability, but customers or clients are seeing that RFID is the easiest way to meet those compliance standards without having to add on a lot of manual labor to comply. So they're pushing those onto their suppliers too, to RFID tag case level items, to make it easier to see where that item came from in the supply chain and then where it ends up.
Yeah, the compliance is definitely an interesting, concept, right? It's kind of forcing the adoption of RFID in certain instances, right? Where clients are being forced to tag items to meet those mandates from the suppliers. So one of the things that we're really starting to see, which I think, will continue to expand is as those suppliers are being mandated to implement RFID is now they already have the foundation, right? And how can they build off of what they already have to do, right, to start leveraging that technology to streamline their internal processes? So pretty interesting to see how that's evolving. And you mentioned one key aspect, Adam, as far as the data, right, and integrating this, and that's a question I have for you, Akila, from a data perspective and getting access to this real time data. Can you maybe walk us through kind of how this has evolved, and really what does this mean moving forward for operational visibility within these end users?
Yeah, no, great question, Ryan. I think what I guess even has surprised me is how real-time data is not just helping people do their operations more efficiently. It's sort of obvious, so I can find my things faster. We have customers that used to take 2 to 3 weeks to locate an item and now are able to locate it in a few minutes, right? So just imagine the amount of effort. We had a customer that had 11 expediters whose entire job was just to locate stuff. And they basically reallocated all of those 11 expediters to do other jobs it now because they don't need to look for any items. But I think what I'm seeing more and more is how business models are evolving. I think it reminds me sort of e-commerce. When Amazon came up with a website, everybody was like, oh, that's a cute little website. It's really not going to change, how you do your business. But what we're seeing is as people are adding supply chain visibility, their business models are changing. So we have a distributor that we work with that started enabling these smart stock rooms for their end customers. And not just did it allow them to replenish faster and make sure that there were no stock outs, no production downtimes and things like that. It's actually helped them win massive contracts. Like their customers are now saying, hey, I am only going to work with a distributor that provides me real-time visibility because that's the only way I want to run my operations. So now their customers are referring all of their suppliers saying, if you can't get into real-time visibility, I don't want to work with you, right? So, and I think people sort of miss out on that. Everybody's thinking of this as a cost savings, but they're really not realizing that this is a business model shift, right? How you run your supply chain fundamentally changes once you have real-time visibility that not just you have access to, but you can provide your end customers access to, right? It's the whole Amazon, your box is 5 steps away. We didn't really expect that, but now everybody expects your box is 5 steps away. I was at a customer last week and their truck didn't make it on time. And the owner was on the call with the truck guy and saying, I mean, how in today's day and age can you not have an accurate ETA for where your truck is? That's just the expectation that everybody has off of your business. So from my perspective, it's not a good to have anymore. It's how you have to run your business is to provide real-time visibility internally as well as externally.
That is an outstanding point, Akila, because that's something the way we as consumers that has shifted, right? The expectations. You're 100% right. I almost demand, right, to know where my product is, how fast am I going to get it, that expectation, and I think that does affect buying behavior. I think in a way, especially during COVID, and we see the shift of being able to go and just drive into a pickup at a store, right? And knowing what's in my inventory, what's in stock on the shelves that I can come and consume right away. That shift and looking at it from both perspectives, right? Of, okay, I can streamline and gain an ROI on my internal operations, but what's expected of me within the marketplace for us to even continue to be relevant within the space? Very interesting. Excellent. So I do want to take a quick shift here and really start diving into the technology, right? Of, we're talking about use cases and seeing how the industry is trending specific to the technology, right? That's enabling these solutions. Want to look at, right? We have the debate over passive versus active, and there's a lot of different technologies out there, right? There's BLE and ultra wideband. And question for you, Adam, could you maybe walk us through how the technologies evolved, the specific of adoption of passive and how that's being utilized, and where we're still seeing active tags and Bluetooth and ultra wideband, right? Where are these playing, and what are the solutions that we're seeing these being submitted to?
Yeah, so I think Ruben kind of touched on it earlier, right? Passive RFID is kind of the standard. Most of our implementations are in that space. A lot of that has to come down to cost. I mean, the tags are relatively cheap compared to active tags, right? Difference being with a passive tag, you've got to light it up and then it responds back its location. You're not getting a real-time location of that tag. You're getting a point in time when it goes through a choke point or is read by a handheld device. Active's always beaking, this is who I am, and this is, and then the sensors receive and determine where that tag is at. So you've got expensive tags, battery management, things to think about with active tags. So passive is really streamlined in adoption because while clients want real-time locationing, after you start going through it and looking at the business problem, what they're trying to solve, a lot of times that point in time can get them the data they're looking for and get them to like 80, 90% of everything they're looking for at a greatly reduced cost to an active solution. Where we see active tags still being used are for things like work in process, a lot of auto manufacturing, aircraft manufacturing, things where you want to get real-time updates on where assembly happens to be on a product, and then a lot with high dollar, high cost assets where you need to know where this thing's at, where maybe not being able to find this immediately can cause downtime. Healthcare, there's a lot of BLE use cases in the healthcare industry, knowing where equipment's at because they need it real time for emergency situations. For the ultra wideband specifically too, you get into large areas of coverage on high dollar assets. I think we see those a lot in clients trying to do maybe forklift tracking for optimization of how they move product through a 3PL or their DC, as well as maybe directed work, right? If I know where this forklift is at during a shift, wherever it goes, now I can have a smart system that says, hey, this guy's on this side of the warehouse. There's a pickup over here. Let me assign it to this forklift instead of sending somebody from the other side of the shop. So there definitely are use cases for the active technologies. I think we see them a lot more in work in process and in high dollar asset tracking.
Outstanding. And from a Xemelgo perspective, right? Ruben, we have these different technologies here, and I think you had the slide that showcased earlier, right? Our ability to consume this data. Could you walk us through a little bit on, from that software perspective, how do we integrate this data, right, from these various type of technologies, and how do we merge this together to get a true perspective of what's happening within the operations?
Yeah, that's a key component of our solution is the ability to ingest data from many different technologies. There's lots of sensors out there today. Adam just went through a bunch of different solutions that are out there and available. You need to have the ability to intake that type of data from any type of sensor, which we can do, and also you need to plan and prepare and be able to intake something else that we don't even know is available today. So technology change on a daily and monthly basis, as we all know. So our phones change every 6 months. There's a new version out, right? So with technology, it's the same, and we have to have a solution that can intake data from any type of solution, even something we're not aware of today. So we made sure when we built our system, we can support that. Data is absolutely key, and what we're seeing is once we get the information into our system, we have the ability to populate and present it in a way that's easily absorbed by organizations and their teams. But also we can stay silent in the background and feed that data to update their system of record, maybe an SAP or MES or ERP type systems. We have the ability to communicate with any backend system through API calls, through CSV files, and really share that information so that all systems are up to speed and up to date. In some cases, we're just used to be a middleware and grab the data from the sensors because it's not easy to filter that information and then populate it in a way that's, again, easily absorbed by other systems. So our system does that. But in cases, a lot of times we're finding on the initial deployments, we're not integrating to the back end system right off the bat. They want to see the data they get, how easily they can capture that information, what this data is doing for them, and then taking it from there to then integrate into back end systems once they reach that comfort level and then scale and grow from there.
Yeah, I think access to that data, right, is key. Without being able to understand where we're scanning, what we're scanning, and utilizing that data, right, is the key. And you made a good point, right, of being able to absorb, right, even what's to come, right. We don't know, as the technologies continue to expand, we need to understand where it's headed. How do we import this data, and then how do we analyze it? And question for you, Akila, from that utilization perspective, could you maybe outline a little bit of what Xemelgo is doing? Are you leaning into AI? How do we stay ahead of that curve to make sure we can consume, these various data points as they're coming online?
Yeah. I think I recently done a LinkedIn post on this. Of course, the chat GPT is everywhere and everybody is talking about that. But I think what people sort of forget is to build those models, it had to scrape the internet, right? There was a lot of data that needed to be collected first before you could do AI. And so I talk to a lot of customers who come to us say, hey, we have to do something with AI. And I'm like, okay, show me your data. And then most of the time, there is no real time or historical data. What they have is point in time data. I have PO data. I can give you PO data, or I can give you, my shipment data. But I think what they fail to understand is for us to train really models that can do efficient forecasting, that can do efficient sort of anomaly detection and stuff, you need data that's collected over a period of time, not when you just did a gimbal walk and figured out how long your takt time is, right? You need this over a period of time. And so I always tell people, like, digitizing your operations is step one to then being able to do AI, right? If you don't digitize your operations, if you're not collecting this data on a regular basis about your work in progress, like Adam was talking about, of your inventory consumption and everything in real time over a period of time, you really can't build efficient AI models with it. And so we have customers that have taken like a two-pronged strategy where they are deploying sensors throughout their operations, and then they're able to use that to leverage ChatGPT and other LLM models and even traditional machine learning models like forecasting and stuff in order to do efficient forecasting of their inventory. I think a great example that I had was we had a customer that was using our system pre-COVID and using it for replenishment. And then when COVID happened, their lead times changed, their consumption changed, their replenishment patterns changed. And if you use traditional sort of forecasting methods, it will not adjust to changes in, now you have a different way of consuming, or, either your consumption went down or went up. But if you're collecting data using sensors, they will respond immediately because you will know right away that I have a dip or I have an increase, and then your models will learn immediately and start changing your forecasts on the basis of that. So anyway, that's a lot of technical jargon, but to simplify, you have to collect the data. And you can put people on collecting this data, but a lot of it is garbage in, garbage out, right? That's really where RFID is at a point where it's so cheap, you can apply it to everything. I think Walmart's applying it to like $3 shirts, right? If Walmart can do it for $3 shirts, I think everybody can afford to put RFID on their operations at this point of time. So take that step one, collect that data, because that is really what's going to come in handy. And back to my Amazon example, Amazon is not great because it does, it has a website and does e-commerce. It's because it leverages data throughout their supply chain and optimizes their operations based on that data. And I think that's really the expectation now moving forward for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Amazon experience is definitely an interesting one. The algorithms, right? It tells me what I need before I even I know I need it, and make sure that it has it in stock and
Yes.
it's going to deliver it here within 2 days, right? So, excellent. So I did want to take a quick focus, right, as we're talking about the technology, how it's being utilized. I wonder, Ruben, if you could walk us through maybe a real life example, right, of a success story where clients been able to implement RFID technology. Kind of what business problem were they looking to solve, and how did they utilize that technology to achieve that outcome?
Yeah, one example that comes to mind is a company manufacturer that was dealing with some challenges on the floor inventory. They had to put extra inventory on the floor because they weren't sure really what was needed, what was being consumed, when was it being consumed. So they had to over inventory to make sure they didn't run out. They didn't stop the line from running. So the ability to have, or the ability to have visibility into their inventory on the floor was key. And they were able to reduce their inventory on the floor by 85% by implementing RFID to understand exactly their inventory they had on hand, where it was, how accessible it was, so they know when to trigger replenishment orders when they ran low and hit those certain thresholds. On the second benefit that they received by deploying this into their WIP operations was that visibility helped them understand the flow and how things were moving, and they're able to expedite the build process from 7 days down to 1 day. So you can imagine, 85% reduction of your inventory on the floor, and bringing your build time from 7 days down to 1 day. Those are dramatic, improvements to operations that absolutely impact the bottom line. So that's one example that we deployed, and how we get there is through discussions with the client, understanding what their real challenges are, and then working with them and with teaming up with AbeTech to understand what's needed to address these problems. Level set expectations. I think that's a big thing with technology, deploying technologies. Make sure that everybody's aligned on expectations. This is what it can do. This is where it can improve things, and let's focus here. Let's get the win here. And that's exactly what we did with that client, and they had tremendous results because of it.
You mentioned a good point on setting expectations, right? And I think that's been a common pitfall, right, that we've seen of people might have a misunderstanding, right, of what the technology can do, right? I'm going to implement RFID and it's going to solve all my problems. But having that realistic expectation of what can the technology do, how can I consume that data, and what's the end result, right, of starting small, get a quick win. And then the nice part, I think, that AbeTech and Xemelgo and leveraging into the manufacturing partners, that we can start small, right, and building these systems so they're scalable long term, right, and being able to expand from one operation or one part of my business to a different process, and then continue to leverage that technology in the infrastructure. And once I have my foundation built, right, now I can start stepping into it. Okay, where else can I add in? Where else can I see visibility or data? What's my next step along the journey? And I think we recently had a nice success story. And Adam, I wanted to throw it over to you as far as kind of the process flow, right? And Ruben, I think you did a good job of outlining kind of where do we start? How do we get to that end result? I think we had a recent success story between AbeTech and Xemelgo. And Adam, if I could ask you, maybe outline kind of how did that project kick off, right? Where was the starting point? How do we go about determining, okay, what technology, where do we read, where do we put the infrastructure, and ultimately then organizing how do we work with a Xemelgo or a partner to make sure we have a buttoned up solution from hardware to software, we're getting that data and getting it utilized.
Yeah, so I could talk a little bit about the process, right? And I think the biggest thing for a client is to understand your problem. Like we've had meetings with clients where they've talked, a certain management level where like, hey, my boss tells me RFID is the greatest thing. I need to figure out a way to implement this in my business. And those projects usually aren't successful. It's not a good spot to start because you're trying to force the technology into your environment to fix a problem you think you have because you're being told you need to use RFID because everybody else is using it. So look at your business and identify your key problem, and then figure out, what does fixing that problem look like? And then we can engage and have a conversation. And sometimes maybe the solution isn't passive RFID. Maybe it's a barcode solution or a process change. But I think before you can really start into this type of project, you need to understand what you're trying to solve so that you're putting in and implementing the right technology. So usually what we try to do then, we come in, have a initial conversation with the client to discuss what their use case is, what the problem is we're trying to solve, get some more information on the process. And a lot of times we can present back to them is a high-level budgetary estimate on what a project might look like from start to finish. A lot of times that you mentioned, start small. So what's that pilot phase? What does that phase one look like? Where can we get some wins to vet out the technology or prove out the technology in the client's environment? So that maybe those later phases are a little bit easier. But get a big picture of where we want to get to, so we know that we're not pigeonholing ourselves at the beginning for like one small little use case. We know where we want to end up, put the plan together, and if everything looks good from there, then we move into what we call the discovery workshop phase, where engineers from AbeTech Xemelgo come on site. We work in conjunction with our partners to understand the client's problem, boots on the ground, walk the facility, see the facility. RFID is a great technology, but there definitely are environmental considerations that need to be taken into consideration when developing a solution. So walk the facility, take pictures, document, put together the process, outline any integrations, and then we come back and we present that back to the client. Really, what we like to say is we want to focus on the planning side of the project, so that when we get to implementation, we know that how long it's going to take, how, and make that a smooth process. So we spend a lot more time upfront designing the solution, vetting out some stuff, doing testing if required, right? If you're in a difficult environment, like a lot of metal or liquid, we can do readability analysis to validate which tag makes the most sense in your environment on those products and where they need to be tagged to be successful. So that when we get to implementation, we're not trying to fix problems we ran into because we didn't account for them in the planning session. So we like to plan a lot up front, develop a solution that we know is going to work before we move into implementation. And then, once they sign off, we move into rolling that out, providing back a project plan, a timeline, and working with our partners like Xemelgo to get everything accomplished.
Excellent. And you mentioned, want to spend a little bit of time on the data side, right? So I think you did a great job outlining the process of, okay, where do I start? And really, what's the best practice when it comes to looking at deploying an RFID solution? And wanted to throw it to you, Akila, on from a data side, right? How do I start? What's the best practice when I look, okay, I'm going to implement RFID to track my WIP or track that inventory that Ruben had noted, right, as that real life use case. How do I go about getting myself ready to consume that data? Are there any best practices when it comes to, okay, I'm going to take this, what do I do with it from there? If you could walk us through that.
Yeah. So I think that's really where like Xemelgo we've designed it in a way that can help customers. So essentially what we do in the software is we're taking, say, your SKU, right? And we're mapping that SKU to an RFID tag. So when that tag gets detected, I know it's for this particular SKU, or I'll map your work order or your asset to a particular. So that association is done in Xemelgo. So we know in our database, hey, if I see a detection for this tag, it's this work order or this asset, or this raw material or finished good. And then once it passes through the readers, we sort of know what that means from a transaction perspective, right? So because if you were to send raw sensor data to an ERP system, it wouldn't know what to do with it, right? Because if I said, I'm sensor 123 and I'm here, I mean, that means nothing to an ERP system, right? And so, which is why ERP integrations have been so hard in the past, versus what we do in Xemelgo is if you call our APIs, we will basically tell you, hey, because this tag moved through this particular location, that means it's now been added to inventory, or now it's been removed from inventory, or your work order has now started the process or finished the process. And that's the language that the ERP system understands, right? So we're taking the raw sensor data, converting that and applying metadata to it so that we can then convert that into a transaction like log that the ERP can understand. So most ERP integrations for us are very quick, like as little as 1 to 2 weeks, where people just call our API and get that information back. Because the information that they're really getting is that transaction level information. So so essentially go from raw sensor data, denoise it, make sure it's clean sensor data, apply some metadata to it, convert that into a transaction, and now it's ready for consumption. So now you can directly import that, using an API or CSV into your ERP system.
So that's it's you make it sound complex, but when you break it down as far as the process, right, it's pretty straightforward of making sure that it's organized and it's consumable, right? I think is the biggest portion of that. And as we talk about consuming data, right, and using Xemelgo or that middleware piece to be able to aggregate that, get that into an ERP system. from an implementation side, Ruben, to kind of go back to you, as we're looking at best practices, is when we're looking at the different use cases, is there a good place to start when we're looking at the technology and we're going to look at, okay, are we jumping right to the data side, or is there a process flow that you guys take from, an integration standpoint of, okay, we're going to start here, here's where we're going to move towards, and here's the end result?
I think you want to start and understand the expectations from an end result perspective for the client. What are they trying to accomplish? Where are they trying to get to? Where's the impact they're trying to have, and the support they're trying to give to the team? I think once you understand that endpoint, you can then build towards that. So, a lot of times companies want to do kind of a phase 0 to a phase 1 or phase 2 approach and get the technology deployed, understand how it works, see the data come out of that and how it can be leveraged, and then expand from there. So it's key that you have a system that can scale. And we've got systems that are running 30 readers to running thousands of readers. So it just depends on the client. The other thing too is what we're finding is that when we're working, let's say, at a manufacturer and we're currently supporting them for asset tracking, quickly they say, well, the visibility is given me for assets. Maybe I can understand better where I'm at in the work order process as I'm building these products and get visibility. What work cell is it? What's the dwell time at each work cell? Is it running over? And if it's running over, is it a potential bottleneck? And leveraging, again, that visibility in other areas. So your assets to WIP to inventory control or to shipment verification, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is a real big use case that companies are trying to get their arms around, because they're getting returns. They're saying, hey, we never got this. And they can't really verify that it was shipped. They know that something was shipped, but they can't verify exactly what was shipped. So having the ability to leverage the technology again at multiple points within the operations, because once you've already tagged the product, why not leverage it throughout all different areas within the operations? And that's really, what the technology does for you. And that's what Xemelgo can bring to the table, is the software that has the capability and configurability to support many use cases across all industries.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I like the concept, kind of work backwards, right? What's the end result? What are we trying to accomplish, and then how do we stage that, right? So to make that process streamlined, and I think that it goes into your approach, Adam, of following that, understanding what we're going to be reading, all the environmental factors, to make sure we're going to be successful long term and reach that end result. I'll throw one last question out, and just a reminder, we do have the Q&A portion coming up here. So if you have any questions, throw them in the Q&A section. I'll throw this out to the whole panel here. Best practices, pitfalls, any last statements you want to make on when we're looking at RFID, right? How do we approach it? Where do I start? And what's the biggest thing that I should avoid, right, when I'm looking to implement a solution like this?
I'll just echo, again, align expectations, with the client, understand what they're expecting to happen, what they need to accomplish, and how do we get to that. The technology is pretty amazing on what it can do and how easily it automates the process of collecting data, but not putting yourself or your client in a position for failure. Making sure we're positioning this in a way that's going to be successful and give them the information that they're looking for. And what we found with RFID, again, over the last, I would say last 3 years, the maturity of the technology has allowed for so much more for us to leverage and to bring to our clients, specifically with passive RFID. I mean, there's a lot of other technologies available that have unique use cases, I think, but passive RFID really encompasses all different types of use cases, because the technology has evolved so much. It's really a great fit for most environments. So if you're thinking about RFID, definitely reach out to us, and we'll talk through the use case, understand what you're trying to accomplish, and we build a plan, whether it's starting with the POC and then kind of rolling from there, but we'll work with you to do that.
Outstanding. Adam, Akila, any other words of wisdom from a best practice perspective?
Yeah, I think just to add to what Ruben said, and Ryan, you said, I think this is the year of RFID, and good thing is Walmart is subsidizing it for everybody. I say, like, the tag that was supposed to be like, $20 are come down to, or 20 cents have come down to 10 cents and probably will go down to like 5 cents in the next few years. So it's the same as applying a paper label. So if you're concerned about, the cost of deploying this technology, I think that's no longer a concern. I think picking the right partners who've done this before is important. You don't want to like try to go figure this out on your own. You can, but it's going to take a really, really long time. And we've had customers who've done this for a year, burnt $1 million, and then come back to us and said, yeah, I just need somebody who's done this before. So I think picking a partner, like AbeTech that has solutioned these things in the past, I think is super important. I think the third thing I'll say is having a champion on your end. At the end of the day, every technology is only as good as the change management that goes with it. You have to get your people along on the ride, right? If your people are not coming on the ride or are not open to like newer things being deployed, the technology won't be successful. At the end of the day, it's only as successful as the people want it to be. So I think having somebody to champion that and taking your people along on the ride, we always say crawl, walk, run, get people familiar with it, get them liking it, and then get them asking for more is the way to get a successful implementation. Pushing something down their throats, it's really not going to be successful.
I think that's a key statement there, right? Of having that internal champion, make it as easy as possible from a system and an implementation perspective. Is it will come with resistance if it's cumbersome or adds steps into a process. So having that champion, I think, is critical. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll add on a little bit to what Akil said there too. We've definitely seen projects, crash because that internal champion maybe got reassigned or left or they don't have one because nobody's really pushing it. You're always going to get pushback from employees on process change and change in general. So having that champion and really working through some of those issues and saying, this is the reason why we're doing it, and getting that buy-in for the rest of the team is very helpful. And I would say the vast majority of clients who are resistant at the beginning, once they get the system implemented, they don't know how they lived with it before. Like now it's like if something happens where it's not working right or they missed a tag read, now they're like, oh, I got to go back to the old way. And that's such a pain because a lot of times what, the automation aspect of RFID is going to help streamline their job and a lot of stuff that they're having to do today that is a manual process, getting off your forklift, scanning a barcode, punching in numbers at a dock door when you're running through orders. All that stuff can be automated. It can free you up to focus on the tasks you want to do versus, a lot of stuff that you have to do because the business needs you to find items or track items properly.
And I think you make a good point there, Adam, of right, if this makes my life easier, how did I ever live without the system once it's in place, right? And when we evaluate those processes, and a lot of this is stemming from operations, right? And we need to gain some operational efficiency. We need visibility into what's happening within the manufacturing environment or our inventory. Going back to the champion statement, one of the calls that I want to make and what I've seen is also having almost a dual threaded champion, right, between operations and IT, right? So as we look to implement operations, we might be all gung ho. We see the need, right? We know that we need a solution for that, but actually getting it implemented and then going through the integration piece, right, kind of hits a different camp within the end user environment, right? And making sure that we have a champion both on the IT side to be able to streamline the deployments and integration, as well as on operations to make sure the process flows and everything is evaluated correctly, I think is important as well. Excellent. So I did want to open it up for Q&A here. So let me pull up the questions here. And as we're talking about, first question here is we're talking about implementing a project. One of the questions we have is, what's the average amount of time it takes to implement an RFID project? So maybe I'll, Adam or Ruben or Kilo, whoever wants to take that one. It's probably depends, right? There's going to be an asterisk on the answer to this one, but I'll let you guys.
Yeah, I'll maybe start with, that's a loaded question. It really depends on, size and use case. I would say we target to try to have everything from like start of the planning to go live within 12 weeks, 3 months is usually our target time frame to try to get a project implemented. So I think considerations on that are lead time on hardware, so sometimes 3 to 4 weeks, depending on what you're buying. It can be longer, so that affects the project plan. And then integration, if there's stuff that needs to be done on your client side, that can add some time to the scope. And it's usually not the amount of work, it's usually getting the people available that do that work to work on this specific project. I would say, though, years ago, that used to be a lot longer. The software implementation, spin up a server was always a process, especially with trying to procure on-site stuff. Working with Xemelgo, you guys could talk more about how long it takes to spin up a server, but real quick with the SaaS model and very helpful for speedy implementation of a solution.
Yeah, so Xemelgo is a completely SaaS-based solution, so we don't have any on-premise servers or any on-site hardware or software that needs to be deployed. We're just spinning up, your configuration in the cloud. So for us is, less than 2 weeks for us to have the entire software up and running. And then on-site, there's really no installation that needs to be done. So when we go on-site, we just get the readers connected to our software. The reader starts streaming. I mean, we did a deployment for an automotive customer, which had about 120 dock doors that was set up. And to get the software up and running took us 2 days. So it really doesn't take too long from that perspective. Yeah.
I think that just piggyback on what you said, Adam, about the ability of getting everybody aligned within the organization where we're deploying, make sure the teams are prepared and understanding the technology that's being deployed, how to use it, how to leverage it. Those discussions and aligning those discussions are really where the time comes in play. If you're looking at a couple handhelds initially, like for a POC or for a phase 0, you can get, and you have those in stock. I mean, you can get that deployed and up and running. You can start doing cycle counts or audits immediately and provide that visibility that way to give yourself some comfort level with the technology, and then take it from there and expanding and grow from there. So it can be a step-by-step process.
Perfect. Excellent. And kind of tying into this, one of the other questions I have is, how do I go about getting demo equipment and setting that up to evaluate our needs? Maybe I'll throw that one to you, Adam. What's the best way to get some trial equipment out there and start seeing if this is going to work for us?
Yeah, contact your account executive at AbeTech. Hopefully you know who that is. If not, you can know it's ping me or Ryan. But we'll work with our partners like Zebra and Impinj, whoever, to get you the proper equipment that you can use in your environment. And probably before that, when I have a conversation, which we're trying to accomplish, just so we can be a little bit more involved in making sure we're getting the right equipment and talk through the process and the solution, so that you just don't get it and then I've sent out stuff and people are like, well, this doesn't work. There is some knowledge behind it to actually get it to work in your environment. So I like to have those conversations first, so we can determine what makes the most sense. And then we can roll out either handheld devices rather quickly. If it requires more with like an on-site infrastructure setup for a pilot phase, we would just put a game plan together around that. And like they mentioned, Xemelgo, we can get a service one up pretty quickly and deployed. And for POCs and pilots, we can be up and running in a couple of weeks.
Excellent. And one of the other questions that was thrown out here is, can you give us a list of current RFID mandates you're currently working on for your clients? So maybe I'll throw that. I'll start with you, Ruben, as far as there's a current list of active mandates that you guys are seeing come up more often than not that we're working on.
I'm actually going to pass it over to Akila since she's done all the deployments and she'd have a better feel for it.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say Walmart for sure. And then I think Walmart, one is making sure, your RFID tagging all of your equipment. They also require you to make sure you're validating everything that's going out, so the tagging is done accurately. So I think we're seeing a lot of that from Walmart. If you're Nordstrom suppliers, I think Nordstrom, Macy's. So in retail, I would say there's a lot. And then on the manufacturing side, a lot of automotive suppliers. So if you haven't heard back from your, automotive customer, you probably are going to be hearing about that really soon. Like all the totes that are going in, the parts that are going in, everybody's requiring that. I think we're working with Ford, Rivian, Lucid, Nissan. There's almost every single one of them is looking at their totes being RFID tagged. I think pharma is sort of waking up to that. Hospitals, so a lot of hospital vendors are being required to now tag inventory. I mean, if you've been in any of the back rooms in the hospital, I mean, I know most people don't have access to that, but it's a huge mess, right? And being able to account, I think I was just talking to a customer and they were saying like they don't know where their catheters are, right? I mean, this is like expensive equipment that they need to have access to. So I would say retail is probably the one that has the most amount of mandates at this point of time. But don't be surprised if in the next 3 years you start to see that across different industries, because we're actively working with, the OEMs, and the OEMs are putting requirements in place right now for all of their vendors, right? So this is, and then I'm based in Seattle, so Boeing's been requiring their vendors to do it for a really long time. The flyable parts all require RFID on them. So yeah, I would say for manufacturing, in the next 3 to 5 years, you will start to see very strict mandates starting to come through.
And to add, I think one of the industries that we're seeing, an emergence of adoption as well is in the food service industry, right?
Yes.
So we're seeing McDonald's, Chipotle, some of these other big suppliers, right, starting to lean into the technology, and those mandates are coming down relatively quickly. So, and that leads in one of the other questions on here is, do you offer integration into Mojix system for Chipotle compliance? So I think, right, in that food space, and Adam, I'll let you field that one.
Yeah, that's an easy answer. Yes. Yes, we can do that. So AbeTech's been a bartender partner, and bartenders on labeling software for, as long as I've been here, so probably 20 years. And, they recently merged with Mojix. So we've got pretty good alignment there on the label printing portion of that and how to encode tags. And then with the integration capabilities from Xemelgo, pushing the data back to Mojix is very straightforward. They've got published APIs. We just set it up, and then we use the business logic or business rules on when we want that data to be sent from the Xemelgo platform to Mojix.
Excellent. All right, and let me give it one last glance. I think that was all of the questions that we had here. Make sure. Excellent. Yeah, so it looks like that was all the questions that we had. So appreciate everyone's time here today. I think this was a good conversation, right? There's plenty to discuss from an RFID perspective, right? As people are looking to utilize the technology in different ways, solving different use cases. I think the options are endless, and exciting to see, right, where the technology is going to continue to evolve to. So following the webinar here, we will send out a recording. So if there's any key pieces that you missed, talking about the best practices, some of those use cases that might be of interest, we'll get a link to that, as well as the ability to set a follow-up conversation, right? If you want to talk to Ruben, Akila, Adam anymore, if you have an idea for a use case, you'll get that opportunity. You can set up some time specifically to pick their brain and understand, is this a potential within my business segment, right? So other than that, unless there's any last questions or any last statements from Adam, Ruben, Akila, I appreciate you guys taking the time to go through this today, and looking forward to more to come.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.